Welcome back. The core constitutional limits of tariff authority, whether it's legal to oppose them as President Trump has, was before the Supreme Court just yesterday. The resolution of that case will have implications for this administration and how we regard the fundamentals of constitutional powers and the presidency for decades. It was a skeptical Supreme Court, not just the liberal justices, but those appointed by President Trump, who heard oral arguments about all of this yesterday. One of those justices appointed by President Trump, Neil Gorsuch, raised concerns about separation of powers, state and federal government, administration. I'm joined now by Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield. He's been on the program before. Glad to have him in person. He led the lawsuit filed by 12 attorneys general to block the tariffs. Not the only litigants involved. Small businesses are involved. They also brought the case before the court. Dan, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining us. I asked Amy Klobuchar, Democrat from Minnesota, Senator, yesterday, the stakes in this case. She had her own answer. What are your stakes involved in this case?
You know, I think the American people shouldn't look at politicians to trust what's coming out. I think what they should do is look at what the lawyers for Donald Trump say. Yesterday, in the court, the lawyer for Donald Trump told every single justice that 30 to 80% of these tariffs are being paid by the American people. 30 to 80% people. Now, people should ask, how much money is that? They're expecting $4 trillion of tariff revenue coming into this country. So you think about the gravity. Even if you just did 25%, let's even cut some money off. That's $1 trillion of money out of Americans' pockets that are coming into the U.S. Treasury. That is a monstrous tax increase by any measure. And it happened with one person in the Oval Office. It didn't happen the way that you have normal tax increases or tax decreases happen through Congress, through your public representatives. So I think that's pretty heavy for the justices to contemplate right now, really Congress effectively ceding that power over to the president in this dynamic.
And I think you would argue, Dan, that even if it was just $1 and it was levied outside the constitutional powers of the presidency, it should be disallowed.
Unquestionably. Think about our history as a country, right? We were a country that went away from having a king, a monarch. And so we created three co-equal branches of government. We have this principle, and this is what Justice Gorsuch was really talking about. We will never allow one of those branches of government to cede that power to another branch. Because you start doing that, the judiciary gives the power to the executive, Congress gives their power to the executive. Now we got a king. And that's what we're not founding against. And that's what you hear Justice Gorsuch talking about, the non-delegation doctrine, real wonky stuff, but really important for all Americans to understand.
I want you to evaluate what the president said about this case in the Oval Office earlier today. Please, let's play that.
So much evolves around tariffs as a defensive mechanism for our country, as national security for our countries. I think it would be devastating for our country, but I also think that we'll have to develop a Game 2 plan. We'll see what happens.
Game 2 plan if the Supreme Court rules against the authorities he has claimed for himself.
Yeah, and I think that's appropriate, right? Congress, remember, for Americans need to remember, the Constitution gave Congress the power to tax tariffs. That is solely their power. Now, Congress, in their wisdom, said, hey, we do want to have some flexibility. Let's give the president a little bit of powers here. But they did it with important safeguards. Safeguards for consumers, safeguards for small businesses, because small businesses need predictability. So if the president uses those statutes, follows within those safeguards, he's allowed to do that. In fact, every single president in the history of our country have used those statutes. What happened here is the president didn't like those safeguards, wanted to go outside those and said, hey, I'm going to be real creative and use this emergency power, frankly, abuse an emergency power that no president had ever done. And that's what this case is really about. You know, you can't just dislike what a president says in Brazil and say, hey, shoot, we're going to start taxing coffee at 50%.
Mr. Attorney General, there is an ongoing case about National Guard deployments in Portland. Catch us up.
Yeah, very important thing in Portland. What we've got going on right now is we have inflatable frogs with rechargeable batteries outside the ICE facility. And we have a condition where we're trying to really value folks' ability to protest and speak their will in this world, but they need to do so peacefully. We have a situation where we have a Trump-appointed judge that evaluated the scope and the land of what's going on within Oregon and said, hey, there is no justification for the president to federalize Oregon's National Guard, right? You got to have certain things. You got to have a rebellion, you got to have a threat of an insurrection, or the president isn't able to effectuate the laws of the United States. None of those conditions exist, and we had a trial, factual trial, with witnesses to talk about what's really going on in Oregon. I think what happened is the president was watching social media and,
some of it very dated.
Yeah, and just came to conclusions. And so that's the wonderful thing about our judicial systems. We can talk about the real facts on the ground and say, hey, these conditions don't exist. National Guard, we shouldn't be normalizing the use of the military in our cities.
Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield, it's been a pleasure, sir. Thanks for coming in.
Always fun.